All right, so hi everyone. Thanks for joining us today for this webinar on cross-border prospecting. It looks like we do have a very international audience, so that's really encouraging to see. So we're going to be looking at how prospecting best practices differ in 5 key countries. So France, Germany, Italy, the United States, and the United Kingdom. So we did speak with VP sales, CEOs, and marketers to basically get their inside take on what salespeople should know when prospecting in these markets. So the idea really is that you're going to walk away from this webinar with actionable insights that you can use yourself or, of course, with your sales team. So to begin, a very quick introduction into who we are. I'm Robin Nichols, and I work on content marketing at IKO. So IKO is a B2B prospecting platform, and we essentially help sales reps to book more meetings and basically sustain their pipeline through automated email engagement. So we're not really going to be talking that much more about what we do here today, but obviously, if you're curious, you want to learn more, you've got our website up there, www.icosystem.com. So at IKO, we are really lucky in that we have a very international staff, and we realized as we worked together that business development norms are just not the same across cultural and country lines. So that kind of piqued our interest, and we decided to explore that topic in more detail for the first webinar of the season. So first, of course, a very big thank you to all of our contributors that gave their time to provide the insight for this webinar. Secondly, you are all going to receive the slides and the on-demand version. We weren't also able to cover absolutely everything in 30 minutes, so we did create an ebook version companion to the webinar that will go into some topics in a bit more depth. So just let us know if you'd like to receive that. Thirdly, and really importantly, there is sometimes a fine line between picking up on cultural differences on the one hand, and on the other hand, overgeneralizing or even stereotyping. So of course, the very last thing that we want to do is to propagate cultural stereotypes or make sweeping generalizations. So please do keep that in mind as we move forward. All right, so what you see here on the screen is a model from the GlobeSmart platform by Aperion Global. That's a professional training and coaching organization. Now, this model is used to compare how people from different cultures and countries tend to behave in a business setting. So you can answer a quick survey and plot your own line down here and basically see if you are more or less independent, egalitarian, risk-oriented, direct in your way of communicating, and task-oriented than people in, say, the US, the UK, Germany, etc., etc. And in our cases, of course, the people in the countries that you're prospecting. So these graphs are based on data collected from GlobeSmart's over 1 million international users, a canvas of interviews, as well as input from intercultural experts. So where you fall on that spectrum that we just saw is going to impact how you should pitch, time needed between follow-ups, the length of the sales cycle, who's involved in the decision-making process, etc., etc., etc. So these are all the points that we're basically going to go into for the rest of this webinar. All right, so let's take a quick look now at the first country we're going to tackle, which is France. So you've got France here up on the screen compared to the other countries we're looking at. And the first thing you'll notice is that France tends to be quite, in business, quite a status-oriented culture. More so than Germany and the US and the UK. And by status-oriented, I just mean, in a business setting, they're sensitive to authority, they really respect hierarchy in the workplace, etc. So Nadia, who is herself a global account manager from Aperion with 11 years of international B2B sales experience, she shared some tips on how this sort of status-oriented fact translates into prospecting the French market. So first, you're probably going to want to err on the side of formality. The French, and especially the older generations, do tend to appreciate a formal tone and approach. So that means, for example, using the equivalent of dear Mr. or dear Mrs. Instead of just hi first name. Now, obviously, if the person you're talking to drops down and register, you can mirror them and be informal with them, and that might, very well be the case depending on the industry that you're in. But the norm, anyway, is to err in the beginning on the side of formality. You'll probably want to avoid using overly salesy sounding words like value, great, best, or a lot of exclamation points. This sort of comes off as a bit heavy-handed for French readers, though maybe in an American context, for example, it can come off as dynamic or eye-catching. Now, prospectors who use a bottom-up approach might find this strategy a little bit more challenging in status-oriented cultures like France or Italy, simply because somebody lower in seniority might feel uncomfortable talking to their superiors on your behalf. However, if you do want to be a little bit cheeky, you can use the fact that they're status-oriented to your advantage and actually put their boss in the copy of your outreach email. And precisely because they're a bit more sensitive to authority, this may nudge them to respond to you because they want to appear responsive in front of their boss. So you can try this one out and see if it produces better results. In terms of dealing with objections, the French culture is very focused on debate, and this is definitely something that I noticed myself when I moved to France. When a French prospect says no, it's very often not a complete and final no. It's often merely a way of sort of inviting the salesperson to challenge them and debate with them. So, for a salesperson, be ready with lots of counter arguments, a lot of objection handling. Just don't be too put off if a French prospect wants to debate and challenge you. And this does get us back to a general principle in sales, which is, listen to your prospect. Chris from Nail That Sale, who's a sales trainer with 25 plus years of experience working internationally in the IT industry, he outlines, just how important it is to give airtime to your prospect, especially if there's a difference in culture or even in language. Now, France is a very high context culture when it comes to communicating. And high context, all that really means is that for countries over here on this end of the spectrum, good communication is nuanced, messages are often implied, read between the lines. This is, of course, opposed to low context cultures over here. For example, the US is way over on the left there, for which good communication is precise, it's simple, very clear. Things are really taken at face value. So we could also use, direct communication or indirect communication instead of low or high context. So basically, when you're prospecting, if you're from a high context culture, talking to someone from a low context culture, you might want to just, trim it down, cut out some of the context or the lead-in and get straight to the point. And of course, vice versa. If you're from a low context culture talking to somebody from a high context one, think about being a little bit more subtle, a bit more indirect perhaps, and obviously listen to what somebody might be telling you indirectly. Now, just because you know what the norm of a culture is doesn't necessarily mean that you have to follow it. At IKO, we do often like to test out outreach email scenarios that purposefully go against what you'd normally see on the French market. So here on the screen, for example, you can see one of our French SDRs, sales development reps, outreach scenarios that we send using our own solution. It's the first of a 5 email scenario. And you probably don't read French, but you can see even, if you don't, we make a couple little sort of grammar quirks. We even use a smiley face here or there. All of this to sort of, really have a natural, informal tone. And again, this does often work for us because we're a tech company and we prospect to other tech companies. May or may not be appropriate for you and your industry. But for us, at any rate, that scenario really did get quite good results, a 38% response rate and an almost 13% positive touch rate. Positive touch meaning basically, yes, I'd like a meeting, I'd like to learn more. So all that, just to say that going against the grain in sales sometimes can have quite a positive impact. So Jean-Baptiste from AT Internet also shared some tips relating to timing. He said, so, in France, lunch breaks can go anywhere from noon until 2 p.m. He said in his experience, try giving prospects a call between 1:30 and 2. It's a time when a lot of French people they're done with lunch, they're hanging around their desks, but they haven't started any big meetings yet, because those tend to start right at 2. Same logic holds for Friday afternoons. A lot of people go away for the weekends. They're sort of winding down. They might have a bit more time, be a bit more relaxed to chat to a salesperson. In big cities like Paris, for example, the workday tends to start a bit later and last a bit longer than, say, if you're in the country or a smaller town. So again, trying to call someone at, say, 7:30 or 8 might be a good time to get them when they're just about ready to leave the office, but winding down a bit. Whereas, for example, in Germany, by 8 p.m., people are usually already home with their families, kind of switched off from work. France's school vacations depend on the region that you're in. They're not completely uniform throughout France. So just think about, doing a quick Google search, seeing if your decision maker, might be away with their family during a certain time, depending where they live in France. Same idea in the month of May, there are quite a few bank holidays. Which means in France, meaning that it's quite fun to be in the office, but it's not necessarily the most productive month for your pipeline. A lot of people take long weekends off, so just be aware of that when you're forecasting. Okay, so moving on now into the German market. The first thing you'll notice is that in Germany, in a business setting, communication tends to be quite direct. And so for prospectors, that really means that you just kind of want to get right to the point, basically. Cut out a lot of the small talk and the fluff. Stay very data-driven. Really focus on the ROI. Use case studies early on. From Dale Carnegie put it this way. He said, Germans tend to measure a lot of numbers and KPIs. We come from an engineering and a production history. And therefore, I recommend to show clear ROIs during the sales process. So another idea that did come up quite often was that the German market is not particularly receptive to cold outreach. And Erin from Softshell, that's a value-added distributor that actually specializes in business development in the DACH region, she specified that with emails, a double opt-in with an easy unsubscribe button is certainly recommended, if not required. So the legal, regulations are a little bit too complex to go into detail now, but she did recommend checking out this document, The Legal Situation for Email Marketing in Germany, Austria, and Switzerland, from the Certified Senders Alliance. Okay, so, how do marketers and salespeople work with these restrictions? They do have to get new business from somewhere. This is going to sound like standard best practice for any prospector anywhere. But for Germany, I think that you really do need to be extra rigorous about appropriately targeting, really preparing your sales email or call, really reaching out at the right time. Jean-Baptiste explained that, because it is so easy to get blacklisted with email in the German market, their sales team actually sets their marketing automation thresholds to be higher for Germany. Basically making it so that only top decision makers get reached out to, right as they interact with high buyer intent content. So Jordi Brazier, who is the Senior Director of Sales Operations at Kubo, he also gave a good tip, which was that in these markets where cold outreach is a bit more challenging, and for his example, it was the Dutch market, but seems relevant here as well, it's a good idea to spend a bit more time building relationships with people that have access to opt-in lists. So basically, conference or event organizers. This can be a good way to sort of work with those challenging outreach restrictions. So in Germany, most people get to the office between, let's say, 8 a.m. and 9 a.m., and calling after 5 isn't really recommended. The idea did come up a few times that it's probably not worth trying to get a hold of somebody outside of working hours or while they're commuting, which isn't necessarily the case in the US, for example. In terms of holidays, again, the 2 weeks around Christmas are usually pretty slow. So finally, Germany's got a very linear sense of time, and all that really means is that deadlines and punctuality are kind of culturally highly valued. So this is kind of a simple one, but basically just be on time, especially if you compare this with, say, the French or the Italian sort of notions around time. It's a bit more flexible in terms of timing and scheduling. Okay, so let's move on now to the Italian market, which in some ways is quite like the French market. They sort of share this Latin cultural roots. Now you'll notice about the Italian market that it's very relationship oriented in business, more so than any of the other countries we're looking at today. And again, what does that mean for a salesperson? Let's say for big deals, maybe 70K and up, you are expected to take a client out to dinner, see them face to face, build that face to face relationship. When you're prospecting, check the CRM. Are there any subjects for small talk? Is there an event you can stop by and say hi at? Even spending just 10 minutes on LinkedIn to try and see if you've got some connections in common. Somebody you both know that you can put in copy of an email, in the subject line even. All these things are going to carry more weight and take you farther in a relationship-based culture than one that's task-based, like the US or the UK or Germany. So again, if you are using IKO to engage your prospects, remember that you do have a window of 1 hour after you engage a contact and before the email is sent, so that you can do precisely this, go into that first email and personalize it in this way. So you can also see how interdependent the Italian work culture is. And that really just translates into needing to consult the whole group or team before making a decision. So again, this could mean you might have a bit of a longer sales cycle, a bit more people in your demos. You might want to leave a bit more time again between follow-up emails. Now we're lucky enough to have an Italian account executive with us, Arianna Burra. And she was able to share her experience, prospecting in Italy. So as with France, in Italy, it's quite important to use proper titles. So if somebody has an advanced degree, for example, use Dr. So-and-so. You'll probably want to use quite a formal tone for outreach emails, perhaps even more so than in France, and certainly much more so than in the US or the UK. All right, so here's an adaptation of a prospecting email that we normally use on the UK market that Arianna translated and sort of adjusted for the Italian market. And again, you probably don't read Italian, but this will be in the ebook version with a translation. And basically she just made it a notch or two more formal than the original one that was meant for the UK market. And this scenario did have quite good results for us, an 84% open rate, 38% response rate, 9% positive touch rate. And one thing I wanted to highlight was the subject line. With an 84% open rate, the subject line was very simply just meeting request in English. And it worked quite well for us, so could be a little tip for you guys, see if it works as well for you. So in terms of timing, calling around 10 a.m. or 7 p.m. is good. You've got to keep in mind that there's usually a reasonably long lunch break. It could be anywhere from noon until 3 p.m. depending on the region in Italy. In terms of off periods, August is pretty slow. The Christmas holidays last around 2 weeks, say from December 24th to January 7th. And there is a week or so off for Easter. Okay, so let's go across the Atlantic now to talk about prospecting in the United States. So it's a lot more common to be informal and even playful in an American business setting. We can see here just how egalitarian the United States are. So it kind of makes sense that you can, be on a first name basis with a very senior decision maker, for example, in the US. And Jordy put it this way. He said, in the US, you can be very conversational, like, hey, I just thought I'd drop you a line. In Germany, the UK, and especially France, it's much more formal. In the US, you can take more liberties, grab someone's attention by being fun or playful. Now, you'll see here that the American style of communicating is very direct or low context, especially compared to the other countries we're looking at today. And again, this means, messages are basically just taken at face value. You can really just get right to the point. And this should impact how you pitch. If I quote Jean-Baptiste again, American business culture is very pragmatic and value-minded. It's all about how relevant your message is. If you have a good elevator pitch for the first 10 or 20 seconds, an American will listen to you no matter if they're commuting, at work, or at home. But if you're not clear, nothing will happen. But in Europe, you need to introduce yourself, make small talk, warm people up, and the first 30 seconds are spent doing this. So here's an example of that really sort of direct style of prospecting or communicating. This is a prospecting email I received myself a couple weeks ago from an American company. And if you compare it with the French or the Italian emails we saw earlier, it's polite, but it's very direct. I mean, the first sentence gets right to the point. The formatting, the bold, the bullet points and everything draws your attention right to the key areas. There's no context or icebreakers or anything. So interesting to sort of see the differences there with Western Europe. So in the US, it is generally speaking easier to make a sale over the phone, up to a certain deal size, of course, than in Western Europe. And this might be because American business people are quite risk-oriented, more so than Italy or France, where people might need a few more reassurances. They'd like to talk to existing clients, be sent a lot of case studies, etc. Another quality a little particular to the Americans is that they're at the same time independent and egalitarian. So this could be the right area basically to try for a bottom-up approach. Might have a bit more merit here. Now again, a lot of people did bring up the fact that in the United States, cold calling and cold emailing is already quite common. And Rael, who is the Chief Commercial Officer at Usabilla, that's a company that helps brands to optimize their websites through live user feedback, he specified that he does prefer an email sales outreach approach in the US, since, again, people are just receiving a lot of cold calls already. And he did emphasize that this does mean that it takes more touches to get a hold of decision makers. And this is sort of, a reason why automated email engagement can be quite an attractive solution for markets that are, already quite saturated with outreach. So the last country we wanted to look at was the United Kingdom, and we know a lot of our viewers today are from the UK, so we're not going to linger too much on this point. But we did want to make just a quick comparison between the US and the UK. So we can see here that the US and the UK, they look to be quite similar. Those two lines there, the purple and the orange, follow each other pretty closely. But there were some areas in which there were a couple differences. New Voice Media did a survey in 2015 where they talked to 908 American and 910 UK employees working in B2B about their experiences with salespeople. And the stats did seem to uphold this idea that the US is a bit more of a demanding market, let's say, when it comes to outreach. So, over double the respondents in the US than the UK were completely dissatisfied with sales approaches they'd received. 86% of Americans versus 68% of the British said that during a sales call, relevant information really makes the difference. So the Americans, I guess, sort of appreciate when a sales rep does their homework and are frustrated when they don't remember information that was already given. Now, interesting for those who are thinking of doing cold calling or cold emailing in the States, Americans seem a bit more skeptical, let's say, and less likely to pick up the phone or open an email from someone they don't know than the British respondents. So again, all of this, really just food for thought when you're thinking about developing your new business strategy for the States. So we're pretty much out of time. We did really want to try and stick to 30 minutes. But if you did want to walk away with just a few bullet points from this webinar, I'd say very generally, be prepared to build relationships when prospecting in France and Italy. So, this means name dropping, icebreakers, finding common ground, etc. Do be aware of cold emailing and cold calling regulations in Germany. Do your due diligence, really be creative, and invest in ways of getting a hold of opt-in lists. The American market has already been exposed to quite a bit of cold calling and cold emailing, and has a much more sort of fun and informal tone than is found, let's say, in Europe. Another point that did come up quite a bit, and we didn't talk about it earlier, was that if possible, it is best to use native speakers when prospecting in foreign countries. Just sort of makes the whole experience, I guess, a bit more enjoyable for your prospects. So, thank you very much, everyone, for attending this webinar today. I do hope you'll walk away with at least 1 or 2 useful points you didn't know before. Unfortunately, we're not able to do live Q&A, at this session. But if you do have, your own cross-cultural prospecting stories that you want to share, or even if you have examples that go completely against what you just saw, that's perfectly fine too. You've got, my email address up there, robin@icosystem.com, the company's email address. And you'll all be getting the slides as well as the on-demand version of this webinar and the ebook companion if you'd like to receive it. So again, thanks very much for attending, and I hope to see you all again soon.